Good morning. This is Eric Kampmann with Senior Pastor Chuck Davis, and we have been talking about his book, The Bold Christian, which will be coming out early in 2016. Yesterday we talked about who the real Jesus is, and I want to sort of continue that conversation here with a slightly different angle on it. A lot of people in our own time talk about a God that is far away, a God that sort of got the thing going and then sort of moved away and let everything take care of itself. There are others who say that, well, God doesn't even exist. They could be agnostics or atheists, but they see the world basically simply in naturalistic terms, and somehow all of this came into existence. But the Bible says something very different, extremely different. And I just want to read one thing that Paul says when he's in Athens, and he's talking about all these statues that the Greeks have put together of various gods. But he says the God that he knows, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. Though he is not far from any one of us. You can go throughout the entire biblical narrative and you can see all these instances where God is actually coming into the human story, coming into the natural story. We sometimes call it supernatural, but in John, Jesus said, God is spirit. And there's a reality to that I'd love you to talk a little bit about, the intimate relationship between us and God.
It's a complicated issue because God is transcendent. He's wholly other. He's separate from us. And so he's not kind of baked into the creation, kind of like a pantheism. But he is separate, but he's fully engaged. He's not a distant God. Even though that he's other, he doesn't remain other. Part of God's working is that he reveals himself to us and makes himself known. And as sovereign, he stays engaged in the story. In fact, I would suggest that he's the main storyteller, that he's telling a bigger story. I often refer to it as the subtext. The text is what we see happening, but God's telling a bigger story. It's a story of his love and how in his love, even though we rebelled, he's pursued us. He's not an angry God in heaven tapping his foot, wondering when we're going to get it all together. He's a loving father who sees his sons and daughters making a mess of their life. And so he comes into that world and he engages that world. He's not a distant, cold deist who set up this working world, kind of like a watchmaker, lets it run then. Mm-hmm. He's engaged without somehow overcomplicating it by over-engaging. It's kind of hard to explain the sovereignty of God and our partnership piece. He's a wooing God. He's a loving God. His sovereignty is accomplishing a bigger story in ways that somehow don't interfere with the story that we are actively participating in.
Because he created us in freedom. He created us, the human creature he created was free to decide. So when you go back to Bonhoeffer, not to decide is to decide. To decide is an act of courage, and it's also, in our world, it could be an act that leads you to good places or to bad places.
And he had to do that in his experiment on love. I call creation the experiment of love, because if God simply made us puppets, it wouldn't have been a love relationship. Right. True love has to give the other object of love the ability to reject that love, or it's not really love. And that's the nature of God's love. And he pursued us all the way to, like we said yesterday, even sending his son Jesus to be our rescuer after we made a mess of this whole thing.
This is Eric Kampmann with Chuck Davis, and we've been talking about Chuck's new book, The Bold Christian.